1. Madam Speaker, ladies and gentlemen, it's extremely difficult to be a poor person, and contrary to popular belief, things can get worse. That is something that we brought about from the start of our case line, wherein we told you the state cannot be overburdened to have to figure these things out like magic. Because a certain sense of urgency, a certain sense of accountability, and a certain sense of priority has to be able to happen when allocating very scarce resources to people who need it. But coming from my speech, I explained how this exists in a spectrum, and we need to be able to understand who to be able to help as a function of who is helping themselves. Their side comes in and talks about how it's anti-woman, it's anti-minority, and it cooks the very people who we're trying to help. But in no way do they really able solve the problems they accuse our side of. Because they're correct. This happens on both sides, and we explained to you, coming from Matthew and Winkle, that ultimately, when you're able to have more access to data points, you're able to understand who are helping themselves and as a consequence, freeing up capital to be able to help other people. This debate is about how these most impoverished individuals will be able to improve their condition. And as an average reasonable person, we're expected to know what welfare is and how it works. Obviously, coming from my speech, I told you that if you cannot get a job or you're cooked or you really can't get a job, then those are the very people who need the aid the most. Which is why those people who can work and are willing to work, regardless of what kind of job it is, need less of our help, and as a consequence, we free up more money to be able to help the very people on the far side of the spectrum that they talk about. A few reasons why their side cannot take this debate. Number 1, they were quite dismissive to our framing and our comparative. They accused us of saying, oh bro, it's not a policy motion, but then ask us how it's going to work. I think that for this to be a good debate, we have to assume that it's going to be at least decent. That is why we connected it to the idea of the rice, and we told you that more data allows us more inferences to be able to make to best optimize all of these particular resources. The delta on their side is questionable because if they acknowledge it exists but they're not fine with the rice, then they need to be able to prove that it's effective right now. But they seem to treat it as though it's this house believes that it does more harm than good kind of motion instead of really going with their true comparative. Number 2, a lot of the things they say are like symmetric. It literally happens both sides. They talk about people being oppressed. They talk about them being taken advantage of. That is why Matthew and Winkle's point about civil servants being able to gather data and check up on these people aren't just checking them up if they're getting a job. They're also making sure, like how social welfare works, doing checkups to see how they are doing. And even if that's not the case, as what Matthew implied, there are legalistic structures to be able to push back against the worst harms that these people are exposed to. Make no mistake, we understand that if you are very, very poor, you're stuck with little alternatives. And on our side, as long as you're able to be employed, as what Winkle put in their whip, to be able to take advantage of the very capitalist structure that harmed you, you need to be able to have some sense of not being reliant. Because the question I have is, if this is so bad and the state is so perverse and bad things can happen, then how exactly would being reliant on them be able to help your condition in the long run? For all of these reasons, we are very proud to stand on side proposition.